Hello and welcome to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen Haupt, and I'm joined today by Mary Stanford. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Colleen.
Oh, thank you for being on. I'm so excited. And Mary Stanford teaches theology at Christendom College, and she's joining us today to talk about how men and women view bodies and how this affects relationships. And she received her Master of Theological Studies from John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and the Family. So, welcome.
Thank you.
And let's just jump right in. You were talking a little bit about the nature of the symbol when we were originally discussing this idea and how it relates to theology of the body. So can you just discuss a little bit of that since it's pretty key?
Yes, definitely. I do think the concept of symbol is probably the key to the theology of the body, because it's really a way of explaining what the body is, right? I think there's many views in our culture today about what the body is, and most of them are erroneous, but they are sort of, I do think they reflect elements of the truth about the body. If you ask people what the body is today, sort of in the culture at large, I think many think that the body, they might describe the body as something I have, right? A sort of straight up instrument that I do things with, okay? And as much as I would say that is, that's not true, there's an element of truth in it, but it's not the whole truth. And the other side of what you might hear today or see reflected in the culture today is, rather than an instrumentalist view, is what I'd call more of a reductionist view. It's the idea that the body is something I am, right? It exhausts my identity. It's all that I am, right? And of course, the sort of cult of the body, as it might be called, whether it means, having to look perfect, to present yourself, through social media, cropping those pictures and making your body look as perfect as possible, because if my body looks perfect, then I must be perfect, right? That's all I really have to offer. And in truth, again, that is not true, but in truth, there is an element there that I think is actually true. And the concept of symbol, the body as the symbol of the human person, really ties the two together. Because when you think about what a symbol is, it sort of has those two elements in it. A symbol is a physical reality. Okay, there's always something material, sensible about a symbol. But a symbol is never just that. Okay, a symbol is a physical reality that represents, that makes present an invisible reality.
And a symbol is different than a sign, right?
Well,
isn't that kind of
I think sometimes, so sometimes symbol and sign can be used synonymously, and I think that's fair.
But it's not. But I think there
can be sort of if you talk about symbol in the most sort of complete and full way, it perhaps does it actually becomes more akin to what we as Catholics call a sacrament, right? The definition of a sacrament, right, is it's a physical sign, right? But it actually makes present that very thing that it symbolizes, okay? So, when we talk about the Holy Eucharist, right, the bread and wine, we, as Catholics, we say it's not just a sign, right? It doesn't just remind us of Jesus. We say it actually makes Jesus truly present, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And so it's a sacrament. I'd say in the fullest sense, in that way, the body is a sign, because there are many ways, there are many signs that could make me present to you, right? I could write you a letter, and you have that letter that reminds you of Mary Stanford. I could leave a voice recording that would make me present to you in some way. I could even leave sort of a cardboard cutout, right, of myself, and you would see me, and that physical item would bring me to your mind, right? But there is only one physical reality that makes me, my interior dimension, my spiritual dimension, right, my thoughts, my words, my soul, present to you. And that is when I am in the flesh, right? There's no other way for me to be more fully present to someone than when I am in the body. And so really, St. John Paul, in his Theology of the Body, says that the body is a symbol in that way, in the way that a sacrament is, in that it makes present an invisible reality in a way that couldn't be made present otherwise. So there is this sort of symbol par excellence that you might say, as opposed to just everyday signs, a flag, a statue, a painting, something that we see that sort of represents or reminds us, brings to mind some invisible reality. But that being said, if you're talking about, let's say, the flag of a certain country, right? I see a flag. It is a physical thing, right? It's a physical item. And when I perceive it, right, that flag brings to mind, okay, let's say it's the American flag. I think of our country. I think of maybe our founders, our principles. I think of freedom. I think of people who have died for our country. There's sort of a myriad of things that are brought to mind and are meant to be communicated through that physical item. So we have two aspects there. Number one, this sign, this flag, it represents something. Okay, it sort of shows forth something. But the other element of it is that it doesn't show it forth for its own sake. We use signs, we use symbols to represent an invisible reality for someone. Signs and symbols are always interpersonal. They're always meant to communicate or represent a reality to someone. And I use that word, communicate. Symbols are meant to communicate. They're meant to bring persons, spiritual beings together. Mm-hmm. But we, because we are beings that are physical, but not just physical, right? We are physical. We have a visible dimension and an invisible dimension. And so because we ourselves exist at that sort of intersection of the physical and the spiritual, that's where human beings are, right? Angels, totally spiritual, right? Yeah. Animals, totally material. We exist at that intersection. That really is the world of symbol. That's why we require symbols and signs to communicate. We communicate the spiritual through the physical. And so we see that the signs and symbols that we use as human beings, again, I mentioned a flag, maybe a statue of Our Lady, right? We see a statue, we don't worship the statue, right, as they cleared up in the 8th century. But nonetheless, that statue reminds me of Our Lady, right? The actual person that it represents. So we use signs and symbols. We use words and language, right? Those are another physical thing, right? We can hear language or we can see it written to communicate a reality. So symbols both represent, they make something present, something invisible present, and they do it for the purpose of communicating, for bringing people into unity. And that, I think, is reflected in those two ways in which the modern world today sort of views the body. Mm-hmm. It's either something I have and I use, instrumental, or it's something I am. Okay, it's me. Again, taken out of context, neither one of those exhausts the reality of what the body is. But when you see that a symbol has a dimension, that representational dimension, in the sense that my body isn't me fully, but it is a part of me, and it makes the rest of me, it allows me to express my interior dimension, right? My intellect, my will, my thoughts. And certainly it allows me to work in the world, right? My body is, in a sense, instrumental. I can do things with my body. I can accomplish things with my body. So there is a sense that the body does have a certain instrumental character, but it also has that representational character identified with, this is me in a sense. So both of those things are true, but you have to put them together. And you mentioned at the beginning, a while back now, about how men and women sort of, I do think that this attitude towards the body as something I have versus something I am does seem to be reflected along gender lines. It does tend to be the case that men tend to see the body more as an instrument, something that they do things with, okay? And women tend to be the ones that see the body as something they are, right? Women tend to be the ones more concerned with physical appearance and looking good. We tend to be the ones who are more affected by praise or denigration, right, of our physical appearance. And these things are very much rooted, I think, in the bodily difference. Okay. And Saint Teresa Benedicta, who was the German philosopher Edith Stein, I personally think her insights on the distinctive perspectives of the masculine and the feminine really weave very well into the theology of the body presented by John Paul, because she sort of tries to explain why. Why is it that women tend to see the body as something they are? And there are good aspects to this and dangerous aspects to this, just as the male view has good and dangerous aspects. And I think that both of those result from the fact that we are fallen. And so sin sort of warps us into some of the negatives. But in terms of the positive, I just want to talk about the positive aspect of seeing the body as something that you are, right? She says that a woman, because her body continually through its structure, through its hormonal cycles, right? A woman's body tends to remind her on a regular basis that she's female, right? You don't usually see women running around trying to prove to everybody that they're women. Their bodies reveal it to them in a way. And so because of that close connection, Edith Stein says a woman experiences a very close body-soul connection, resulting in a kind of identification with her body. And the positive aspect to that is, A, she does recognize that her body is a part of her person. It's not just something she does things with. And a woman experiences this close connection. And so when a woman sees a body, she usually recognizes a person. And that's very important, right? In our culture, where there is so much objectification and looking upon persons as less than human, right? An object for pleasure, an object to dispose of. There's this whole, I think Pope Francis called it the throwaway culture. We have this culture of death, right? Where we don't see bodies as persons, right? And I know that in the pro-life movement, they've found out that when a woman is able to see a sonogram, a woman who might be abortion-minded, if she does have access to that sonogram, if she's able to visually perceive a living body in her womb, she is more inclined to recognize a living body. That's a person. So for her, she plays an important role. And John Paul talked about this term. It gets thrown around a lot, the genius of women. The feminine genius is really that ability to recognize a person. Women have this ability, this capacity, as he put it, to sort of help humanize the culture, to bring our recognition of persons. We see a body, we see a person, and that's really good. On the other hand, we see that in our fallenness, in our woundedness from original sin, we often, in that identification, there's a kind of over-identification with the body where we think we're just our bodies, right? And that's all we have to offer, right? And so many of the dangerous things that come from that, right? If I'm not beautiful enough, if I'm not perfect enough, if I'm not fit enough, right? If I don't have the right fashion, if I don't have enough people looking at me, if I can't gain attention toward my body, will I feel affirmed? And of course, we see how dangerous that can be, to not see yourself as more than your physical dimension. So that's the risk. But on the other side, on the instrumental side, the idea that your body is something that is more of an instrument, that it's not you, it's just what you use to do things with, right? Well, on the positive side, right? And think about it. I mean, young men, even though, yes, their bodies have male characteristics, they don't always feel, I'm a man, right? Just knowing that they have a male body. Men tend to feel that they have to sort of go around and prove that they're a man. They have to use that body to do something, to accomplish something that they're proud of, right? And again, through the centuries, right? Through the millennium, we have male initiation rites, right? You have to go hunt that deer or score that touchdown or, even on a more intellectual level, win that debate. Men often feel that they're not really worthy of being called a man until they do something that is then sort of praised, respected, affirmed. which means that they tend to not identify with their bodies. They identify with their accomplishments. Men tend to identify with the work that they do with their bodies. Now, on a positive note, there's something good about that. Because by saying, I'm not my body, they automatically have an intuition that they're more than that. I'm more than just my body. Look what I can do, right? Look what I can do, of course, with our imagination, our thoughts, our mind. We execute things with the body, but that there's an awareness that, hey, I'm not just my body. I am this. And so being aware that your identity is actually goes beyond just your physical dimension is good and it's healthy. And sometimes it's a good antidote for women who, if they're struggling with accepting the way their body looks, no, get out of that. Go do something, accomplish something that you can then be proud of. And it can really expand your sense of spiritual identity. I'm more than just my body. Look what I was able to do, right? And whether it be, intellectual work, hey, maybe it's accomplishment through sports. Maybe it's charity work. Maybe it's an art, a craft, a hobby, whatever it is, doing something, using your mind, right, to then do something in and through your body reminds you, and then you have something to rest in, a sense of accomplishment and identity that sort of goes beyond your body. Men kind of have that a little bit more naturally. On the other hand, if you only identify with your work and you don't identify with your body, there are some serious problems, right? You're more at risk at seeing your body as just an instrument, something I do things with. Well, great. Then you might view a woman and her body as just an instrument, just something you do things with. So there's, of course, that deep danger, that profound wound of the potential toward objectification that we see in our very fallen world. But also, if you only identify with your work, with your deeds, with what you do risk being crushed when what you do fails, right? Mm-hmm. Men and their sense of masculinity is threatened when they fail, when they're unemployed, when they're injured, when things happen that keep them from being able to be proud of an accomplishment. Their sense of identity is very much at risk. And that's something that women can help with. A woman can say, no, you are distinct from what you do, right? I love you for you, right? You are good. You are wonderful. And the man's like, I didn't do anything. I didn't do it well, right? So we do together have the capacity, I think, to affirm one another in the ways that sort of along those gender lines, we sometimes become vulnerable. We think, the particular, I guess I'd call those fallen wounds that sort of fall along gender lines. So when you really think again of that initial presentation of how is the body the symbol of the person? Well, a symbol both represents and connects. There's something in itself, what it is and what it does. So a symbol really does encapsulate both the aspects of being and doing. And so that really is, I think, that is the way that if we understand the body as the visible, physical representation of the interior spiritual dimension of the person, that is the fullness of what it is, right? And we see that for men, right, sometimes they risk seeing that body as just a body, just an instrument. The woman, because she is at risk of seeing herself as just a body, what we end up seeing in the dynamic between men and women, in the fallen dynamic between men and women, is something very dangerous, because it's not quite as simple as when men and women sort of fell from grace, when they fell from that original relationship with God, where they saw, right, Scripture says that the man and the woman looked upon one another naked without shame. Mm-hmm. Like, that's we all know that line, but it's sort of, what would that mean to be without shame? Because today, if you accuse someone of being shameless, it's usually not a compliment, right? So shamelessness, it implies that there is some sort of shame that you ought to be having right now that you're not, right? An awareness that you are not, an awareness of your dignity, an awareness of someone else's dignity that you're simply not showing, right? So what could naked without shame mean if it doesn't mean shameless, right? To actually not have shame. And this is where I think John Paul really gives us a beautiful way to describe it. He says, Adam and Eve were in that mutual gaze where they're naked without shame, right? it meant that in that moment they were both experiencing the human body as a perfect symbol. Adam looks at Eve. He's not really seeing her body. Her body is so perfectly communicating her interior dimension, right? Her intellect, her will, her spirit, that he looks upon her body, but he actually doesn't see her body. Adam sees Eve. Eve, in looking upon Adam's body, perceives Adam. It's an example of perfect and total communication. They are being made known to one another through the body, through that symbol. But that symbol is so perfectly presenting their inner dimensions that they are actually able to know one another, to unite with one another fully. Whereas now, of course, in our fallen world, sometimes the body can be a distraction to that, right? How do you really get to know someone, right? Well, you need to talk to them and have a conversation with them, right? We have to get to know their thoughts and their feelings and their views. But sometimes we find that the body can be a distraction to that, right? If someone is, if a guy doesn't think a girl is pretty enough, maybe he won't give her the time of day, right? Or maybe if someone is so sort of overly sexually appealing that maybe that's a distraction and they're just looking at her body and they're not listening to what she's got to say, right? Mm-hmm. So there is this sense in which we definitely get that communication between the sexes and really between anybody is a challenge, because sometimes the body becomes an obstacle rather than the actual intermediary or sort of medium or vehicle of communication. And so when we see that, we realize, oh, in its original state, the body was a perfect symbol. He says that the body is still a perfect symbol, but our ability to perceive it as such is marked by we somehow make this distinction between the sensible and the spiritual, rather than seeing the spiritual as communicated through the sensible. And so now it's possible for a man to look at a woman and think she's just a body, right? Maybe an object. And while I want to turn around and say, and the woman looks at the man as an object, it's not quite that simple. It's not that women are incapable of objectifying or mistreating or using men. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We can do that, right? But the greater tendency seems to be something more asymmetrical. A man looking at a woman is sort of an object to use and enjoy, and a woman seeing herself as that object. A woman is not really seeing herself as more than that. That's actually, I think, the greater danger. And because a woman being so quickly able to recognize the person and a woman being person-oriented and relationship-oriented in a particular way, which is sort of a whole nother conversation, so many women, they're craving that union, they're craving that bond with another, that sometimes they're willing to be treated as less than a person. They're willing to accept treatment that is not in full accord with their dignity, basically to be objectified, because that's sort of the best they can hope for in terms of longing for that relationship.
You see that all the time in today's society.
I know. And here we are presenting ourselves. And when we actually recognize that men, because they have this particular gift for sort of, again, the way their bodies are structured. I mentioned at the beginning a woman's body-soul relationship, but the structure of the female body, it is characterized by an ability to receive and nurture a person, right? That's what the female body is. That's how it is structured. Well, a male body isn't structured to receive and nurture a person within it, right? It's actually characterized by size and strength to go out and act on the world, to do things outside of himself, right? Mm-hmm. So we see naturally there is this tendency of a man to go out and sort of have a particular objective, work the earth, whether it mean build something, fight. But it's something that he does outside of himself.
Get food, put a roof on the house.
Get food, roof. And all of these things are in service of the person, of course. But he's less directly related to the person as a woman is in terms of her orientation. She's more person-oriented, relationship-oriented. He, by virtue, again, of simply his physical design, tends to be more object, project, work-oriented. So together, obviously, this works beautifully. But the fact that a man he has certain tendencies to see his body as an instrument, to see things in terms of objectives, that we need to make sure that he doesn't look at a woman that way. We want to make sure that he sees her as more than just a material thing. And so in our relationships, right, as you're saying, if you look on the online and in the magazines and everywhere, when we women in the movies, right, we think, oh, well, the way to get that relationship is to use my sexuality. We're feeding right into that wound, right? We're feeding right into that wound. And so really the challenge for all of us, right, is to restore the body's original role as symbol, which again means it's physical, but it is so much more than physical. It is meant to communicate and to bring about, again, to connect persons. A symbol always communicates and brings people together. When you think about the ways in which people communicate today, we use that word communicate, but we usually talk about social communication technology. Mm-hmm. People, by and large, are now communicating not through the body, not through that original symbol, mm-hmm. but through another material device, right? Through their technology. Again, it is a human thing to communicate through physical media, but as we get more and more removed from the body, mm-hmm. our communication and our ability really to make our interior dimensions present to the other, it becomes compromised, right? We know it's quite possible to sort of put out a false identity, in your social media profile, right? And we even use the term friends about people that aren't really our friends. They don't know us, right? When you have a physical, live, in-person conversation with someone, mm-hmm. it's unscripted, right? You're vulnerable. You might say something embarrassing or awkward, right? And you don't know what they're going to ask you. You don't know what they're going to reveal to you. So there is this very scary at times vulnerability that we experience before the other. But that's what it's meant to do because you're really open. You have to be yourself. There isn't time to sort of go and be someone else or go, craft a line or look up something witty or let me find a better picture of me that doesn't show that flaw or whatever, right? And so actually it is 100% in the live attentive presence of other bodies mm-hmm. that we actually, whether we like it or not, we reveal our inner dimensions.
Well, and I love how that aspect of it doesn't negate the body either. If it's supposed to be a symbol of how you're communicating, it's not just saying that this is me, but at the same time, what you're wearing, how you look, what mannerisms you have, how much focus you give to someone, those are all revealing your inner dimension. So it's affirming the body as something really good, but also not reducing it to the only good thing there.
Absolutely. It absolutely ties in both of those aspects. And one thing that comes to mind, and I hate to keep focusing on the negative, but it's a positive negative. I mentioned shame earlier, yes. right? We see that first sort of mysterious experience of shame in Scripture, right? Adam and Eve go from gazing upon one another naked without shame, mm-hmm. whatever exactly that means, right? What we've interpreted as a perfect communication between the two, to, okay, their relationship with God is broken, right? They distrust God. They actively disobey him. They basically say they believe the devil's suggestion that God is a liar. Mm-hmm. And they grasp for that fruit, which will give them total control. They don't need God anymore. So they commit the sin. And the very first manifestation of that sin is they're hiding. They're hiding in the bushes, and they're sort of hiding from one another with leaves. There's a sudden awareness of one another's bodies, as though the body is this sort of separate entity instead of an integral dimension of this larger whole. So what we see from the beginning was that shame was experienced as kind of a desire to hide, right? Whether we're hiding from God, we're hiding certain parts of our body from the other. Shame is experienced as a bodily awareness and a desire to sort of conceal. Mm-hmm. And when you look at ways in which people show that awareness in the world today, whether or not they are committing a sin, or maybe they're sort of feeling at risk of someone else committing a sin, it's always shown in a physical response. Maybe you blush, right? Maybe you've said something that you feel ashamed of, or maybe someone else said something that made you feel embarrassed or undignified, right? We blush. Maybe we break out into a sweat. Maybe if my child, breaks something that he's embarrassed to tell me about, maybe he's hesitant to make eye contact with me. Certainly covering up. If somebody barges in on you in a dressing room, oh my goodness, we want to cover up, right? It's an instinctive response. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong by being in the dressing room, but when someone's dignity is at risk, there's this instinctual response to cover up and hide. It's a physical response, and it's good, right? I think it's a good thing, right? And when we say someone is shameless, it means you're not having that instinctual physical response that someone's dignity is at risk here, right? Mm-hmm. And what we see as communication has gone more and more from face-to-face to interaction that's mediated through technology, we see shame disappearing. And I'm not just talking about sort of like the fact that we know the internet over-sexualized, people posting pictures of themselves that, why are you posting that, right? Well, you're not going to blush because you're not in the presence of others who might be seeing you like this, right?
And you're not seeing their reaction.
You're not seeing their reaction, right? Or hearing what they're saying, right? And so that's huge. We see that. But even just plain what I'd call rudeness, right? The boldness of it. My sister and I used to joke that in her office where someone might be a little ashamed to ask for another vacation day or maybe to call in sick, you have to face someone and say this thing, right? Oh, if I can just email it, if I can just text it, I'm willing to ask for things or say things that I'm not feeling that physical effect of shame that would come from looking someone in the eye. So we see this in the internet comment boxes, right? Someone will write an article and you see the comments, right? And some people can just say the cruelest and most dismissive and demeaning things to others. They don't have to look them in the face. They don't have to make a defense for what they're thinking, right? It's so much easier to see another human person as an object if you don't have to look them in the eyes, if you don't have to be in their physical presence, right? It's providing this convenient distance where maybe that's a person on the other end. I don't know, right? You just maybe see a name or an icon. And so when you don't experience shame, you begin to treat others in a less than human way. You begin to act in a less than human way, right? Because we lose that sense of the whole, the spiritual, physical dignity of the person. And so what we see is that the more and more that we do not relate to one another in the flesh through live human conversation and presence and having to look at one another, truly the less and less aware of the human person we actually become. So when you lose physical interaction, you start to lose shame. And that is a huge, huge threat to human dignity that we see. We see it happening, and it's something that we lose when we don't have that that in the flesh existence. But being in the flesh with another, again, it makes us vulnerable because, as women, we sort of want to be perceived as perfect, physically, and we have this desire, and men certainly, want to, impress, right? And so you have this dynamic where that vulnerability of just being me. I know me might get revealed in and through my physical presence, and maybe I'm afraid of that, or maybe I'm afraid of the other person revealing themselves to me. What if it's too much, right? That giving and receiving, that vulnerability that happens in real human relationships is scary, right? And so in an attempt to control that, we like to have that safe distance of our technology, but what it really does is erode our sense of the other's humanity.
That's so fascinating. I've never actually thought of bodies as a symbol that way, but it totally makes sense that and that's how we all know that that's how you're most physically present to people is when you're in the same room with them. But yeah, it's just having the fact that it's written into our bodies, we are the body soul composite. And there's a reason for that. It's not just who we are. I mean, it is who we are, but it's not, I just lost my train of thought too.
Yeah. No, but it is when you think about it. And what's probably more scary is today you will see people engrossed in their technology where, okay, they may well be connecting with another person on the other side, but they are becoming less and less aware of the persons in their presence.
Well, and that's how God created us. That's how we are.
That's how we
created
are.
us to be present.
So when we see that we're becoming less sensitive to those in our physical presence, particularly women, that's eroding that feminine genius. It does have that power because you'll see it. You'll walk around and you'll see people totally ignoring other people that maybe they're called to have and in other circumstances would have had a spontaneous conversation with, right? Nope, I just have this person I'm relating to and I'm ignoring those. So it is absolutely possible now to sort of be in someone's physical presence, but not to be aware of it because we're drawn to the more abstract communication. And so for women, it can kind of erode that personal awareness, that feminine genius. And for men, it seems to feed into that ability to sort of abstract, block out persons, focus on objects. So it kind of compounds some of the struggles men have, and it erodes some of the gifts that women have. So I think it does different things to the masculine and the feminine gifts and weaknesses. And sadly, none of them are good.
Yeah.
But just one more thing about the masculine ability. A lot of times, so I think we can recognize how relating not through the body, but through technology can put our human relationships at risk, right? You're not really relating to the real person. You're trying to keep up with maybe too many friendships and relationships, right? Because when you take the body out of the equation, the body in all of its beauty and dignity, it also limits us, right? My body places me here now, this place, this time. I really can't have 1,000 friends, even if I'd like to. And that's one of the things we look forward to in heaven, that time and space won't be an obstacle, right? Because there is that phrase, the more the merrier. It's true, right? In a true friendship, the more the merrier. When people share your interests and your joys, it's beautiful, but we can't do it. We can only, we're limited. But in the other area that people often celebrate technology is our ability, because it removes the body, it seems to remove space and time. You can research, you can find out a million things. It's the information age, right? I used to write a paper in college and I'd have to walk to the library and look things up in the card catalog and maybe find a journal article and then Xerox it and take it back to my dorm room and study it, right? There was a lot of space and time issues that sort of limited what research I could actually do, right? Yeah. But now, at a moment's touch, you have a million things at your disposal. Are college students today really reading those millions of articles that are at their fingertips, right? Imagine that. Oh, I've got it all here. When am I going to read it? Oh, when am I going to read 1,000 articles, right? They're not doing it, right? They can't, because they can't do it. But there's this pressure and there's this sense that, oh, I can figure that out. And so we have become a culture of skimmers. It's this information overload. You can't, in your physical finiteness, in your physical limitedness, actually digest 1,000 articles, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just reading the one really well, right, we feel this pressure and it's very overwhelming. Sometimes you can't concentrate. People are losing their ability to concentrate and focus because it's so easy to switch to another topic or another perspective. But it's been shown that we are becoming a culture of skimmers, okay? And when you skim, after a while, I like to make the connection to food. During Lent, we often skimp on food, right? We fast, and it's good. It's good for us, right? But we sometimes plan on having a big feast on Easter, and we're going to eat everything. I plan to eat, the moon. I want to eat everything. All these things I've been offering up. And Easter Day, and I'm 5 jelly beans in, and I'm full. Oh no, I'm full. I wanted to eat that whole ham, right? What happens is, when you skimp on food, right? When you fast, your stomach shrinks, right? Mm-hmm. You can't even take in as much. The same thing happens when you skim. When you're constantly skimming, and then you go and try to take in and focus and take in a whole article and read it from start to finish, your attention span has shrunk. So even though removal from our bodily limits gave us this idea, I call it the sense of the infinite, right? Mm-hmm. Time, distance, quantity, no issue anymore because our physical limitations aren't a problem. They still exist, right? The body helps limit you in a good way by making you present and helping you to know your limitations. And so what they're actually finding is that young people are losing their ability to focus. They're not even able to take in this infinity of information. And they've even looked, there's Cal Newport is his name. He works at Georgetown, and he's written about how even in the workplace where technology is often most celebrated, that attention spans are shrinking because, of course, you can be texted or emailed at any moment, and you can you're doing your research and you can have this and this and this to switch from, and it's harder to really focus and invest that long-term intellectual focus to solve problems. So even sort of that problem-solving gift of focus that men sort of have as part of their masculine genius, blocking out things and focusing, that's compromised by removing the body and removing that real sense of the natural limits that our bodies have. So that in terms of, in all aspects, the body really does, it makes us present to others, but also to ourselves and the limits that we naturally have that would help us sort of really approach the world as we're designed to do. So there's just so many different, I think, aspects of what our body does for us in helping us realize the gift that it is, but that we need to relate to others in and through. The more we can relate in and through the body, the more we can have authentic relationships and really preserve those gifts, those intellectual gifts that we have. Creativity is one of them too. Mm-hmm. I just remembered that. And if I'm going on too long, just stop me. But the oftentimes creative works of creative nature come about where our mind is sort of at rest. Mm-hmm. And I would connect it to when children are bored. When my children come to me and say, we have nothing to do, right? Sometimes you don't have anything for them to do, or they don't want to do the things you've given them. So you send them outside, right? And they complain and, But if you don't give in, if you wait just long enough, they're going to find that old cardboard box in the backyard. They're going to make a game. They're going to invent something. Creative, works of creativity. You do not have works of creativity unless your mind experiences boredom, unless there is some rest, right? And so if there's always something to scroll on a screen, right, it fills in all those moments where we would naturally experience boredom. People are struggling to create. And that translates to the spiritual life as well. People are struggling to pray because the Holy Spirit, it's not like God. It's not like we have to wait around for God. God is always present. The question is, have we emptied ourselves and opened up some time in our own life to make ourselves present to God, right? And that means sort of being bored, taking away those things. And in a normal life, unmediated by technology, there's going to be moments of the day of boredom or of nothing to do, but just wait, right? Something will come to us. So that's another way in which the body's so-called limits actually open us up to a deeper fulfillment as a spiritual, physical person.
That's awesome. Thank you for joining us today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Just since I ended on that note talking about technology and relationships, is that it doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily turn back the clock and undo all of our technology. Certainly it is a tool and can be used for good, but it does mean that some of the things that used to happen more naturally, like that conversation on the airplane, or there's nothing to do tonight, let's play a board game, or let's read a book, right? Some of those things that are done less and less today, we just have to be more intentional about because they are good. Some people say, well, how do we get kids off technology? Well, have you sat down with your kids and played a game, right? Or maybe we sit together as a family and read something. Maybe we turn off the TV, or okay, if you want to use technology, maybe we sit down and watch a movie together as a family and then talk about
Instead
it.
Of everyone watching it on their phones separately.
Exactly,
because
then you don't have to compromise and you don't have to, because it's true, you fight about, what are we going to watch? But so it simply means that, when I tell young men and women, like, girls don't text the boys don't text the girls. There's nothing scary about that. There's no risk there, right? Boys, go up and take a risk. Talk to that girl. Ask her to dance. Girls, just wait. Make them do it, right? Like allow that natural, because real human interactions can be a little scary sometimes, but give it a chance. It's going to be something more real and satisfying. And it's just that we kind of have to be more, this word gets overused, but more intentional about trying to create opportunities to have in-person experiences together as a family, between men and women, whatever, things that might used to, in the past, happen we didn't have to work to make them happen. And we took them for granted, that we kind of lost that. We didn't realize some of the things we were losing with a lot of the new inventions. So it doesn't mean we're going to have to undo them all, but we need to be more intentional to create opportunities for conversation, for spontaneous experiences, for community experiences, because those are the kind of things where we really do reveal ourselves, right? You don't just sit with a person and say, okay, reveal yourself to me, right?
Yeah.
You have conversations, you do activities together in groups, and people reveal themselves when you have a common activity. And we need to create some of those. And I think that will help our younger generation in particular to be able to communicate, to concentrate, and to create. The 3 C's, I like to call that, by sort of being a little more intentional about in-person activities that we actually make happen.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So good to have you on. I love talking about this kind of stuff. So,
Thank you so much, Colleen. All right.
And to all of our listeners, please remember to like, follow, subscribe, share with your friends, whether you're listening on YouTube, Rumble, or any of our audio platforms. And keep on living the culture of life. God bless.